Oh dear. I was both right and wrong regarding this Formula 1 news. It turns out the identity of the miscreant has been revealed, and it was Red Bull, and not possibly Ferrari. But I was right in regards to the vitriol toward the FIA and Red Bull has now just gotten worse after the little bit of a cover-up. So, hang on to your tea trays! In life, it's wise to admit when you were wrong on something, and that was me potentially reckoning that it might have been Ferrari involved in all of this more so than another team. And for that, I do apologise, and I will learn from it. But at the same time, we were all mystified as to who exactly it could have been. Many people just going, surely it can't possibly be Red Bull involved in this. However, I am pleased and saddened that my theory regarding this news blowing up in the way that it has, because the FIA tried to dampen it down, has resulted in any other news seemingly relatively sedate or not worth talking about, including the fastest lap point being scrapped for next year. It's a bit of a shame really. I was actually kind of a fan of the extra point, the bonus point for the fastest lap. It seemed to work in junior formula as some sort of reward for any top 10 driver. But, as is the case in Formula 1 these days, it's sort of become more of a tool rather than a reward, and what we saw in Singapore with Daniel Ricciardo getting the fastest lap in Marina Bay, and many people hoping that it was some kind of tribute, I mean, a very weak tribute from VCARB, but now it just really brought to light that really, it's just now a tool for big teams to be able to use against other teams, so, you know, the FIA's just got to take it away, so, dang it Red Bull, we can't have anything fun! But the big news here is that Red Bull has come out and publicly stated that they were the team that was told to remove their system, which allowed them to adjust the ride height of the front bib or T-tray within the confines of free practice. Given that the ground effect principle is such a game changer, because we all remember what happens if it goes the other way and it turns out not to be good, i.e. Mercedes in 2022, it could have major ramifications for the team going forward. And I also imagine that a lot of you are primed and ready with that one gif of Michael Jackson eating popcorn, aren't you? Okay, Law, well, what happened just a couple of hours after you put out your video yesterday? Well, it turns out that Red Bull decided to identify itself as the person involved in this potential T-tray bib monarchy, and we all thought that the identity was going to be kept secret by the FIA and would never be known to the public for forever. Or unless someone significant at Red Bull decided to drop that in a future book 5-10 years down the line. But this news came up after other teams raised concerns about possible rule breaking, suspecting that Red Bull might be altering the car's ride height between practice and qualifying when the car goes into park foamy conditions, which ramped up especially after last month's Singapore Grand Prix. Seriously, was that a month ago? Wow. And reportedly, Red Bull were warned by the FIA in confidence about this, but only now has it gone public. And now looking back on it, it was kind of surreal how suddenly the big jump was, because in FP1, Verstappen was laughing to himself hysterically that he was slower than Colapinto. Fast forward to Q3, he's right behind Lando in the front row, and he's actually relatively competitive. Singapore was one of their best weekends in a while. But after all of the other teams started to get antsy when the open source database uncovered all of these documents and how this technique could actually be manipulated from the outside, the FIA definitely had to respond and make it aware, and therefore from the United States Grand Prix onwards, there will be tighter checks involved in that particular area to make sure that no other team were exploiting that particular loophole or that little bit of a trick, including Red Bull. More information came to light about the device, which turns out can be adjusted during practice, making changes after qualifying illegal. While no evidence suggests that Red Bull has broken the rules, the matter is certainly going to drag on for months and months and months and months. And Red Bull maintains they haven't done anything technically wrong, stating the device can't be accessed once the car is race ready, and both parties have agreed on steps to ensure compliance moving forward. Which to me is now screaming what happened with Ferrari at the back end of February 2020 after what went down in 2019. That situation was regarding that season where Ferrari was particularly competitive in relation to Mercedes regarding their engine. That being the fastest out of anyone's, even better than the Silver Arrow's offerings. But suspicions were arising in relation to how the system delivered its power in regards to fuel burn, and even though the teams never launched a formal protest toward Ferrari, the FIA ultimately reached a deal with Ferrari for the system to be adapted or removed, and a bunch of new technical regulations were subsequently forged to prevent it happening again. And then 2020 happened, leading to Ferrari's worst season in F1 since the early 80s. Now, okay, you might be thinking that, oh, this is just another example of the FIA being known as the Ferrari International Assistance Alliance, or something like that, as is the joke around the paddock. But it really does give me confidence that Mattia Binotto will be able to make waves over at Audi because engines are his bag. That's what he did before he became the Scuderia team principal. He would be quite happy working in the background, away from all of the media days of being a team principal, and just tinker with engines and power units. So I expect Audi to be quite competitive as we get a couple of seasons in with that moniker. But I am kind of on the fence with this one. I still stand by the concept being an impressive one on a technical level, and applaud the engineers and designers for coming up with it. But now that more information has come to light as to how it works, and how secretive Red Bull have been about it up until now, it's starting to look more and more iffy. Now, I'm not going to lie, I wasn't expecting it to be Red Bull after the situation that they were mired in earlier in the year regarding that supposed asymmetric braking system. 2 design controversies in one season? Now, one thing to point out here is that both of these examples have not actually yielded any physical manifestation. It's not like we've been able to peer into the internals of the car and actually see these things nestled within all of the gubbins inside of the car. These are all, at the moment, like Schrodinger's cat or something like that. Are they there or are they not? But if this turns out to be the case, and they were both associated with Red Bull, but it does go to show that Red Bull is still capable of making innovative stuff, even if it does fringe the line between being legal and illegal. But then again, you might be thinking that, oh, who's to say that Adrian Newey didn't come up with these little bits of designs right before he left, and maybe they were just sitting on the shelf that Newey decided not to use them, and instead they decided now that Adrian had gone to use them, or something like that. But then, to be fair, I do have to wield the foam of doubt on this one because I am not a technical engineer. This is just me speculating and maybe just hypothesizing or something, so it's very important to point out. And I was suspecting that this new device could have been something operated by the driver instead of being operated by an external mechanic, something akin to adjusting the brake balance in particular corners. But now it's starting to become clearer that potentially this system was externally adjusted as per the documents uploaded recently that other teams saw more of and took umbrage with. How specifically, it is uncertain. But Red Bull implore that it's something that cannot be tinkered with once the cars go into Q1. Now, okay, you might be saying, well, they've been found out. How come the FIA hasn't immediately come out with a statement with a potential punishment on the books or something? Why isn't it like the case with Racing Point where they got a 15-point reduction? Or maybe with McLaren, with Spygate, they got completely disqualified from the constructors. Why isn't Red Bull being punished for this, you might be saying? Well, I can understand why this might be difficult, because right now, there is no real tangible evidence to prove, no smoking gun, no aha moment showing the example of the bib adjusting itself within parc fermé conditions. It's probably impossible to be able to find out. This is a really, really clever system that can easily hide its tracks. There's effectively no trace behind it, no trail, unless you decide to dedicate loads of efforts to look into the telemetry between sessions and then be able to unearth it in that way or something like that. But even then, maybe Red Bull may not be able to come up with some reason why that's the case. It's really, really muddy in being able to try and prove it without actually seeing physical evidence of it being manipulated, say, for a random camera angle or something. So until any kind of proof comes out, then the FIA can't really just dip into its lucky bag of punishments and go, there! No, it can't do that. All it can do is just go, naughty Red Bull, promise you don't do that again, and promise not to use it. And Red Bull goes, okay. People are still calling out, though, for the team to be taken out of the championship or for points to be taken away. But the FIA really has to be careful with how they respond to this now the team has come out and admitted it themselves. They were the ones responsible for submitting this technical drawing and actually revealing it to all concerned. So even though I was wrong in theorising that maybe it might have been Ferrari and it was Red Bull after all, I was right saying that the FIA, trying to keep it under wraps, actually made it worse for themselves, and we are still talking about it, and this is a topic that I'm now doing 2 days in a row. So hey, this professional yapper on top of a ladder does know something about Formula One, but for many people that might think I don't know much about Formula One, I do appreciate their honesty. And now the FIA's thrown the spotlight back on the rear braking system that we all had almost forgotten about. That had fallen to the wayside practically in terms of awareness, but now it's right back in the limelight. But Red Bull never came out and confirmed that system, although many paddock insiders reckoned it was them. But this time, Red Bull have admitted with this particular system since it was a lot easier to point toward them to because it's an online publicly accessed server. Any team could have come out and said it was Red Bull if they really wanted to. But instead of any other team actually going out and saying that there was something wrong and Red Bull actually published something dodgy, no, Christian decided to take it on the chin and Red Bull openly admit it and saying, no, we're going to be in really good dialogue with the FIA and we promise to come up with a solution. Oh, I bet you Toto is so vindicated right now. You see, I know there was something wrong with Red Bull. You have to go back and look through the archives. I told you all. Red Bull has got a car that is absolutely fucked. Seriously, Toto's grin is going to be so huge this weekend, especially if Mercedes actually get on the podium. I don't think you can possibly measure how big that grin will be. But speaking of Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton has shared his two penneth about the subject, and whilst he is impressed with the part even being a thing, and Red Bull being able to come up with it, he does what Lewis is good at being a wordsmith and dropping a retrospective, backhanded compliment that still gets tongues wagging. I'll read you what Lewis said, but it really goes to show that Lewis is really good at the job of being with public relations. He's really good at offering compliments whilst also casting doubt on something and making people think. So, right here. Ahem. I think the name of our sport is all about innovation. Red Bull have been the leaders and they've innovated. Ultimately, all the teams look at the rules and try to find how to massage those rules and get the most out of it. At the end of the day, they did a better job. God knows how long they've had that, and they've been winning championships. Maybe that stops now. I don't think that's the one thing that's going to stop them. I think everyone else, we've got to continue to be innovators and leading rather than try and catch up. Oh my goodness, that's such a backhanded compliment. Whilst Lewis applauds the engineers for coming up with such a device, he does make thought processes look back to Red Bull's past successes, adding further skepticism and doubt to their accolades. But then again, there is no hard evidence to prove that such a thing exists or has actually made an impact in regards to Red Bull's performances. There's no absolute solution that can actually prove and mix things all together that it was used between practice and qualifying or in parc fermé conditions. And this has all come to light in the 4-week break between Singapore and Austin. Again, this calendar's messed up, isn't it? It's hard to hand down a specific punishment until there is hard evidence. All the FIA can do now is monitor the area of the car even closer than before, and insist that Red Bull not use the device again, and when possible, when the car is broken down next, because Red Bull says it's impossible to remove unless you tear down the car entirely, well, remove it entirely. But all of this is still bringing up the notion of whether or not it makes a huge difference. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but all we can do now is just watch and see what happens. Will it make a difference? Will Max Verstappen no longer be a contender for the victory or even a podium? If there is a fall-off, then that will actually start to lend credence to the idea that it had made an impact, and then people will think, well, okay, well, how long has this been on the car? Was this around when Adrian Newey was here? Or is this something that Pierre Vacher's team came up with or something like that? Or the other engineers of Red Bull from within? But I can assure you, two things will definitely come out of this. First off, Red Bull will be downplaying this to the hilt, like they did with trying to diminish the significance of Adrian Newey's departure. And second, Zak Brown and McLaren, they are going to be going to town with this one and absolutely vilify the team and make themselves out to be the guiding light, the not corrupt ones, the fair ones, the transparent ones. We're already seeing this in action with the press conferences. Lando and Oscar are really flying the flag of McLaren, the papaya one, and showing how good they are and how dodgy Red Bull have been. So Zak should be really proud of them and going, yeah, yeah, yeah! Even Oscar's been quite brazen with his take, saying that it was a clear rule breach and that the solution is no longer in the grey area, now that it's come to light, and is now more in the black area. This is all great for McLaren because it makes people forget about the mini DRS debate, and it also reduces the hubbub when people do recall it. At least the team, McLaren would argue, didn't hide their thing. As to what the party line will be at Red Bull, I think it's quite easy to understand. It will be downplay it as much as possible, brush it off, but be compliant at the same time. Be open, be calm, be relaxed. Just go, oh, well, we got it on there, but we didn't really use it. Oh, it's no big deal. Oh, no, it's fine. It's not going to make an impact whatsoever. Just like with Adrian Newey. Oh, his departure's not going to matter whatsoever. And now Helmut Marko has come out and said, oh, no, we are really missing Adrian, and it's going to take for us some time to be able to actually fill in the gap. Ultimately, Red Bull and the FIA have agreed to something to phase it out in some shape or form. Like I said earlier, in a similar manner to what Ferrari agreed upon, instead of risking a potential disqualification in trying to hide it even more. However, I don't think it'll be quite that easy as the power unit example from 2019, since that news broke regarding the settlement after the season concluded, instead of during the season. So, with the Ferrari situation, it was unclear as to what the impact would exactly be, because we were still a couple of weeks out before the season started. And then the Rona happened, and then we had 3 or 4 months before we actually got racing again, and then suddenly people were shocked as to how bad Ferrari were. But then you had to look back at what happened in February, and then all of the stuff that was going on in the background unbeknownst to us at the time in 2019. No, all this came to light within the span of a few weeks, and we can now potentially see if there is any impact on what's happened to Red Bull's performance, or whether or not it was actually a storm in the teacup after all. Max Verstappen, for example, is towing the party line, stating that it won't make a difference, since it wasn't something he was even aware of. It wasn't mentioned in drivers' briefings. He even said that perhaps he reckoned it was another team using it, and that he was out of the loop regarding it. And that's an interesting assessment. Could it be that Max was legit unaware of this news until it came to light? I mean, I'm now starting to get a sense of maybe that was the case. Maybe it was something that he didn't need to know about. Maybe this was something that the mechanics knew about, and it was something they could adopt into the setup strategy and when they adjust between practice and qualifying or something. The drivers didn't need to know because it was something that they couldn't adjust or something that was unavailable to them, but the mechanics knew how to do it. Again, this is all speculation, this is all conjecture, but this is the only way I can think of if Max is telling the truth and says he has no idea about it, or unless he is actually towing the party line and saying, well, we're just going to dissemble and distort or something like that. But since there is no real evidence to prove this and it's part hidden away from view, it's hard to make a full-on conclusion. But given that Red Bull had a similar dramarette earlier in the year and the FIA were keen to keep the team's identity private then, and then all the other maladies and the issues regarding the car's performance, the plateau of upgrades, it's really starting to make the cost cap breach that they had a couple of years back look all the more prominent. Maybe the punishment back then, the reduction in win time, is actually starting to rear its ugly head. But the consensus from the wider world is that it's impossible to believe anything Red Bull says now. They've been mired in too much controversy. But I cannot stress enough that Helmut Marko's admission of Adrian Newey actually being significant, and that trying to find a good replacement and be able to bridge the gap with the junior rank is going to take a while to be able to do, and that Max might not be able to be patient enough potentially, because exit clauses and all that, it is a really big admission in terms of what the Red Bull playbook is. Dissemble, diminish, distract. In the end, we'll probably not know the true impact of the situation until we start to see races after this news come out, like the sprint race and this weekend. But it's too late to do much about it here, save for the FIA putting more eyes on the Red Bull garage to monitor any changes that involve the T-tray or any potential physical means of tweaking the ride height. Now, as regards to the RB21, next year's car, it definitely has to be removed, because I'm pretty sure that as that car is being developed, the FIA is going to be taking a look and making sure that that part or that device or whatever it is, if it's even there, is not there at all. And we will be able to see maybe for sure the significance of this removal or the impact of this news in Mexico City, because there, aerodynamic downforce and grip is going to be absolutely hard to find because of the altitude. Downforce doesn't really work as efficiently. So if that bit's removed and it did make an impact, then expect to see Red Bull struggle. And this is a race where Checo is meant to perform at, so if Red Bull doesn't have a car in which to do it, then it's going to make the struggle of the mid-season slump for Perez all the more pronounced. All this coming at the worst possible moment, giving McLaren a really important boost. But technical stuff aside, in terms of the optics, it really does make McLaren look far more legit and more squeaky clean. They weathered the storms of criticism regarding team orders, the mini DRS, their conservative strategies, and they succeeded in making Red Bull out to be the villains and a toxic place to work at, which Zak Brown has been really keen to make evidence in relation to the amount of senior staffers leaving recently. This is yet another storm in which Red Bull has to weather, but it really depends on how big the storm is. Is it a storm in a teacup, or is it the size of the Pacific Ocean? We have yet to see, so really keep an eye on this story as it develops, because it is continuing to develop. So be sure to subscribe to this channel to keep abreast as to what's going on, and to find out whether or not my takes age like milk, or like fine wine, or like whiny milk. I mean, okay, I do tend to whine sometimes, but hey, that's what us professional yappers on top of a ladder do. But regardless of all of that, you cannot say that this season has been dull, although I am actually starting to get tired of talking about Red Bull all the time. Which probably will continue since the drivers are backing Max Verstappen in relation to his own spat with the FIA and his colourful use of the English language. To remind yourself exactly as to what happened in Singapore between the FIA and Max Verstappen, and why this could be significant for his legacy in Formula 1, go and watch this video next. This could be his Ayrton Senna moment.